Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm 26 and from Newcastle upon Tyne.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm 25 and I'm from Chester.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm 29 and I'm from Cardiff.
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm 19 and I'm from Doncaster.
Hi, I'm Imogen. I'm 26 and I'm from Blackburn.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm 23 and I'm from Leicester.
Hi, I'm Adam. I'm 24 years old and I'm from Milton Keynes.
Hi, I'm Whitney. I am 22 and I'm from London.
In this video, we will be discussing eating disorders and eating disorder behaviours. According to BEAT, which is the National Helpline for Eating Disorders in the UK, around 1.25 million people are currently living with this mental illness. And the problem is, maybe one of the biggest misconceptions is that eating disorders are related to weight, and that is not always the case, with the biggest eating disorder in the UK right now being binge eating disorder, for which you could be any size. Can you tell me about your experience of living with an eating disorder?
Yeah, so I've had an eating disorder for more than 10 years now. It is a binge eating and bulimia disorder. So it started out when I was maybe about 12-ish and was mostly a result of I'm pretty tall. And I think just in general, I always stood out a little bit. So whilst I wasn't overweight as a child, I think I did attract a lot of like fat comments, just because I'm just like taller and like I've always had like bigger shoulders, bigger hips. It's just like my frame. Yeah.
Yeah. And how, if you don't mind me asking, how are you coping at the moment with it? What is life like for you at the moment living with that eating disorder?
Yeah, so in the pandemic, just before that, I'd had maybe like 1 or 2 years where I'd got it under control. But when all the lockdowns came around again, it just reared its ugly head, basically. I think the reasons are because, well, firstly, I have no accountability, which I didn't realise that I was relying on. But I guess like going to work, seeing colleagues, seeing friends, and having people around me makes me less likely to do something or want to do something.
Right.
And then also every time there's kind of like a lure of the lockdowns lifted, like we're in the third one now, I feel like there's quite a lot of pressure to get normal.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so when that rolls around, there's like a huge panic to quickly sort yourself out. But generally people with eating disorders, like they can put that pressure on themselves and it doesn't work.
I think the other thing is as well, in simple terms, people see anorexia as people who are underweight. People know bulimia is people who purge, make themselves sick. But when it comes to binge eating disorder, which is actually the most common, apparently 1 in 50 people will experience binge eating disorder in their lifetime. And again, I totally understand if you don't want to answer this, as it's very, very personal. But for those that don't really understand what binge eating is, what is binge eating to you?
Okay, so binge eating is usually caused by, say, if you've like starved yourself all day because you feel like you need to restrict what you've eaten, then it means that you'll go, because you've waited for so long to eat and you can't starve yourself any longer, it's not healthy, and that's when you'll eat like a lot in a period of time, much more than a normal adult would eat in that time. A lot of these things tend to be like either really carb heavy or really sugar heavy, so it'll be a lot of things like a lot of bread, a lot of cereal, and a lot of sweets, things like that.
Yeah. And are you supported by your family and friends, if you ever wanted to talk to them about your eating disorder, or has that been a process? Did they not know at first?
So no one actually knows until recently. I've never ever said until last year when I sought some professional help, just because the lockdown made me realise like you can't do this for the rest of your life. Yeah, and they've been really kind, really supportive, but it is difficult. I think we are like surrounded by diet culture, which can trigger things. So it's hard because I'd like to join in conversations like that in a healthy way, but I know that people can be like reluctant to talk about some kind of diet they're on or whatever, in case it upsets me, but it wouldn't, but I don't want them to feel bad about that.
Can you tell me about your experience with an eating disorder?
Yes, so in my first year of uni, I thought it would be great to do 2 courses at once. one of my courses was English language, so I was learning like Latin and a lot of intense stuff, and I just got so stressed with things, and my weight started to drop. I started to see myself not eating as much, and about 9 months after noticing, I was officially diagnosed with anorexia.
Okay, and tell me what you think, or if you think there are any, a misconception about anorexia. A lot of people think it is just, oh, they don't want to eat.
Yeah, I mean, people always say, oh, just eat something, like you're attention seeking. But in reality, like you can go out with your friends for a meal. From my personal experience, I'd be sat around with a group of like 8 people who would be ordering like 3-course meals, and I'd be sat there with a starter, and I'd try and build myself up to eat parts of it. But then in reality, something in your brain is telling you, no, you don't want to eat this. You just want to sit here, and then it just sort of isolates you, and not many people understand that.
And what's it like, especially to be a man and have an eating disorder? Because again, it's another misconception that because it's a very emotional mental illness, it's very complex, it's very specific to people, you know, and I'm not, you know, stereotyping women as the only emotional and hysterical people, but because it is that kind of illness, people don't think that men can have it. So could you tell people?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people just think only women suffer with eating disorders, but in reality, there's over, I think it's 2 million men in the UK aged between 11 and 30 suffering with anorexia and bulimia, and an even higher amount of 5 to 11-year-olds suffering with an eating disorder, and that's just men. 25%.
I saw that recently about
Yeah.
kids eating disorders have gone up, and you just think, gosh, carry on,
It's
sorry.
shocking. Like, you'd never imagine a 5-year-old to be diagnosed with an eating disorder, but 25% of everybody in the UK suffering is men, and again, another quarter of that are 5 to 11-year-olds, which is heartbreaking from a grown-up point of view. But as somebody that's also suffered, you'd never want anybody, never mind a young child, to go through that.
And where, if you don't mind me asking, where are you with it now?
So I still have times where it pops into my head, like if I'm stressed, I sometimes don't eat, but then I try and do it. But I was officially, I can't say released, although that is kind of the right word, released from, discharged, should I say, from the eating disorder clinic maybe 3-4 years ago. So as much as I'm still in recovery, it's something that always stays with you.
Yeah, and a lot of people that I've spoken to today have said that as well. It's kind of like you might look recovered, because that's another thing, you know. In your case, of course, anorexia is to do with low body weight, but with other eating disorders as well, it doesn't matter what you weigh, and it's kind of like just because you look better doesn't mean that you're recovered up here. And it's a very like long journey. And how have people around you been? Have you now managed to, you know, tell people, talk to them about it?
Yeah, so I was very open with my family and my then friends, who didn't really understand it, and they thought it was just like a cry for attention. But the friends that I've got around me now, if there's any thoughts that pop into my head, I will text them and be like, can I speak to you? Can I phone you? Like, this is what's going on. And they're so supportive. One of my closest friends, when I told her a few months back that I was struggling, she was like, oh, we can FaceTime and eat our dinner together if you want. And I was like, don't really want to see people eating me, but eating, sorry. But
Yeah.
things like that just really boost you, and it's needed.
And Matt, can you talk to me about what your experience with an eating disorder has been or is like?
So it's hard to put a definitive timestamp on everything, but I think I started to develop anorexia when I was about 15.
Right. Okay.
So weird sequence of events, really. My dad got diagnosed with diabetes and type 2 diabetes. And one of the ways he was asked to sort of deal with that was to monitor his weight.
Right.
So when I was sort of 15 or so, the scales came into the house, and what started as sort of a harmless checking every once or every couple of days or whatever on the scales, started to become a bit of an obsession, really. And so that was the summer of me being 15 turning into 16, just as I was about to start going into sixth form.
And what made you realise that you then had a problem?
Well, it's very hard to say exactly when it became a problem. I think that when I was transitioning into sixth form,
Mm-hmm.
I think you start having been like the podgy geeky kid for pretty much my entire life. Going into sixth form, having lost a little bit of weight because I was paying attention to it over the course of the summer.
Yeah.
I thought that was just something you did, it's ugly duckling syndrome. You get a bit older, and you start to lose, and you lose a bit of weight, and you whatever, grow up. But the attention and the compliments, they went to your head, and you start to think, oh, maybe a little bit more weight, and I'll get more compliments, or I'll look a little bit better, and it became an obsession to that point. And then once you start to lose weight up to a certain point, you stop, because whatever health reasons, your body goes, no, that's enough. You're healthy now. You're eating balanced diet or whatever, doing enough exercise. And then when I stopped being able to lose weight, I think is when it actually became more of a problem. I'd exercise more to my own detriment. I'd calorie count hugely, and to the point where only the most austere of diets or extreme of exercise routines would see any sort of results really for weight loss. So it became to that point, and then I it's very hard to remember exactly when I'm loath to call them voices, because I don't think that's fair to the people who have other mental health problems. But it to me, anorexia was a little bit like that sort of niggly voice in the back of my mind, always telling me to eat less, do more.
And what does that do to you as a person who is constantly living, I mean, I'm saying this, you haven't said this, but tell me if I'm right, who's like constantly living with that, whatever it is, non-verbal voice of eat less, exercise more? How does that affect you?
It's tricky, because you start to, it starts to, pardon the pun, but eat away at you. It starts to really play on your mind all the time. You start to have a huge degree of self-loathing in yourself. I still, to this day, although I'm much better than I ever was, I still live with body dysmorphia to this day, and things like that. Every time you look in a mirror, every time you try on a piece of clothing, you're always too fat. And things like that. It really starts to work its way against you, to the point where you start to really buy your own hype. You start to really drink your own Kool-Aid in that regard. You think you are a fat mess, and and that just constantly plays on you. And then the other side of that is when you do get very, very skinny. So I remember being in second year of sixth form. So I was 17 at the time, and I think I was sub 7 stone, just above 6 stone, which I'm 5'11" now and quite broad. So that made me relatively quite skeletal, really, in a number of ways. But the problem then is that you have twin concerns. Not only is one part of your brain telling you, no, you're still too fat, you look ridiculous, why are you so ugly and fat? You've got the other voice then of the paranoia about worrying about everyone else around you
looking at you for being so slim.
Yeah. And that's a horrible dichotomy to try and play with in your brain. It's a circle that can't be squared. You think, that people are looking at you because you're so skeletally thin, but at the same time you think you're disgustingly fat.
Can you talk to me about what your experience with an eating disorder has been like?
Yeah, so when I was around 16, I think when I was doing my GCSEs, there was a lot of pressures going on in my life, and I started changing my diet, not unhealthily to start off with. I just started eating a bit healthier, going to the gym, and that was sort of to like balance all the school stresses.
Mm.
But that sort of turned into something very unhealthy, and I started losing weight, and my diet just got more and more and more restrictive. And I think in about 3 months I was in hospital, and then I was admitted to hospital, spent I think now 3 years in and out of recovery, but I'm now finally like on the straight up, I think, I hope, but I don't know. And yeah, my struggles really were anorexia and exercise, but there's been like moments where it was sort of like binge restrict cycles, but that didn't last very long. I managed to get out of that really quickly.
Yeah. And tell me what it's like for you. I know you say you're on the road to recover, which is so lovely to hear, but tell me what living with anorexia and restriction is like. I know, I don't mean do you hear voices in terms of like actual verbal voices, but like what does it do to you? What does it tell you?
No, definitely. I understand what you mean when you say voices, because it's sort of like, even now, even though I'm like well into recovery and have been for about a year, I think, like fully committed, it's sort of like every time you eat, you do have this like voice or like shadow right there saying, well, should you eat that, or should you at least cut the amount down, choose something else if it's like going out to eat, whatever that was. But yeah, I don't know, it is like a voice. All the doctors I've always spoken to, they've explained it as a voice as well. So it's like every time you're eating, there's another voice overpowering that, standing over you, making all the decisions for you, and you just feel so unempowered. But in a weird way, it's ironic, because it's like I'm in the control. Nobody else can control what I'm eating. I'm controlling that. But it's like anorexia is controlling all that as well. So you're just completely taken out the equation.
Yeah, and this is what people need to understand as well, is that it's not trendy. It's not
No, it's
fun.
not a choice.
Exactly.
No.
It's a genuine mental illness, and because, you know, I think a hard thing as well might be, from people that I've spoken to as well, because I know everybody's different, is that initial putting weight on when you are anorexic and you know that you need to get back up to a healthy weight, or you know that you need to stop restricting so much, so you will naturally put a little bit of weight back on until your, you know, metabolism gets back to normal. But when people look at you, I don't mean you specifically, but when people look at you and they say, oh, well, she looks a healthy weight, but do you know what I mean? Like, it couldn't be further from the truth. What's that like?
Yeah, definitely. Because there was one point where I was like severely underweight, and people could notice that. But in the same light, when people say to me, have you lost weight? And it was quite clear, you shouldn't be saying that. But equally, when I had gained weight, and if I hadn't seen people for a little while because I'd been in hospital, I'd get back. And I remember once, actually, I was on my way to school in sixth form with a friend, and she said, well, if you walked past me in the street, I wouldn't think you were anorexic. And she said that to me, and I was like, that's because it isn't about your weight. Yeah, weight can be an indicator that you're physically unwell, but even after gaining weight, it's a mental illness, and there's all that rewiring that's still got to go on. And my consultant always said to me, you won't start real recovery until your mind is not in starvation anymore. So the recovery does not start until after your weight restored.
Can you tell me what it has or is like to live with an eating disorder?
It's a funny one, because to be honest, my experience of having an eating disorder started when I was like 11. So I'm 26, so I've had it for like 15 years. And I truly believe it's something that just doesn't go away. So once you experience one eating disorder, and I think this is the same for quite a lot of people who have eating disorders, it's like you kind of go through the motions of different ones.
Right.
So I started with I basically, I was like really overweight as a child, and I constantly had people in my life, like family members, like trying to coax me into dieting and stuff like that. So I was like, from a young, and like people around me were always dieting, so it's kind of like from a young age, I was taught that like fat is bad, thin is admirable. So it's like when I lost some weight from like exercising at school and stuff, joining clubs and stuff, suddenly I was getting praised more. People were saying, "Oh, isn't she Bonnie?" Instead of laughing, like thinking I'm the funny one, I went to being like, "Oh, isn't she Bonnie? Isn't she blooming?" And so I associated like weight loss equals praise. So I started really, really restricting, and I developed anorexia, which obviously when you're anorexic, it's not like a sustainable thing to restrict so heavily. So it turned into bulimia. So I was kind of bulimic with anorexic tendencies for years. And then through trying to recover from that, I obviously, well, not obviously, but obviously when I was, I keep saying obviously, but basically when I was bulimic, I'd eat excessive amounts of food and then purge it by whatever means necessary. So when I was trying to recover from that, I just stopped. I carried on doing the binge eating, but stopped doing the purging side. So then that turned into like binge eating disorder. And then, so basically now my experiences of my eating disorder, after like 15 years of like flitting between different ones, thinking I'm recovered, telling everyone I'm recovered, writing songs about it, and now I kind of just flit between feeling like it's not a problem and having periods of time where I really struggle with binge eating. So it's just one of those where I am technically like, I'm way better than I used to be, and I would class myself more in like recovery now. But it is something that just you think you're fine and you think it's gone, and then suddenly it just comes back, and it's just always there in the back of your head.
And to experience, I'm not saying that one is worse than another, obviously, but to experience and go through the motions like that, it's, you know, most people might have like one that develops into another, but you've literally gone through most stages of what it means to have an eating disorder. And I just want to know, like, what does that do to you as a person in terms of your confidence, in terms of your attitudes towards life, family, relationships? What does it do?
Yeah, it's a strange one, because obviously when you're restricting and you do lose weight and you're a smaller person, you get complimented more, you get more likes on your photos, people are more bothered, you get more attention. And as a singer and as the lead singer of a rock band, obviously there is an element of like, if I'm getting attention, that's a good thing, because it means people like me, they like my, and they might like my music. And so I do generally associate that that feeling of weight loss with positivity by whatever means necessary. So it's quite stressful, because then there are periods where I physically can't lose weight because I can't stop binge eating and I'm struggling with it. And then it's really knocks my confidence. I feel like it's in my head when I'm trying to perform. When I'm singing, I'm more bothered about how my stomach looks than I am bothered about how my voice sounds.
Oh, that got me, that did.
It really just, it affects me in that way. But then, I don't know, obviously it's all personal to each person who experiences their eating disorder, but that's been my experience of it.
Can you tell me about your experience with an eating disorder?
Yeah, well, I never got properly diagnosed or anything. We just kind of like, it was something that kind of just everyone knew was going on, except my parents. I think it started when I was about 16, 17. All my life I've been like really thin, like my parents were really thin, but I was the thinnest in my family. And I just remember everyone would always compliment me on like how thin I was. It was never like who I was as a person. It was always like, look, yeah, or I want to be that thin. And then as I remember just getting older and just like, obviously when you're 16, your self-esteem and like how you view yourself isn't very good. So I just thought that all that was worthy of me was how thin I was and how I looked. And I had quite bad acne at that age anyway. So I was like, well, it's going to be how thin I am. And I remember my big thing was calorie counting, and I was on like 700 calories a day. Like, was like less than 1,000, or it was ranged from like 700 to 1,000. But if I ate meal over 1,000, I would freak out and would like just not eat the next day. And then my parents, I never told them. I've never even had a conversation. I've like dropped hints now and then as I've got older, but they know I've never been the best eater. And I remember my dad asking me once, like, are you eating? And I was like, yeah, like straight up, so defensive. And he was like, do you promise me? And I was like, yeah, of course I promise you. Because I don't know, it was just something and I didn't want to be the problem child for my parents either. So
do you think you will have that discussion with them?
I don't know, because I feel like I've got better as I've got older. Friends noticed at university when I'd like suddenly go really thin and like stop eating, or like, and it's quite, people notice when I bring it up because I'll just start speaking out what I've ate during the day. And that's always like my clue for like friends at work when they were like, Shannon's not eating properly again, like something's. But I feel like as I've got older, I've got better with being able to like notice when it's coming and notice like when the thoughts are like starting to settle in and like.
So does it kind of come on in bouts then? Is it triggered by something, or does it just come and go?
It just came and go. I remember the big thing was last year at the beginning of lockdown, and the tops of my thighs touched, and they've never touched before because of how I'm built. And I remember, I think I just cried for like 3 hours that night, and then like had to like just like breathe, because I enjoy working out. That's when I started working out. All friends were really worried about how that was going to affect me because they knew I wasn't very good at eating, and my parents as well, because I've never been a big eater, but it just got worse, I guess.
So that's really sad though, because to some people, you know, their thighs might touch every day, and everybody's different as well. But for that to have such an effect on you, I wonder how, you know, you say you're better now. Do you think there will ever come a point where you are, in a sense, fully recovered?
I don't really know, because there's times where I feel like I am fully recovered, and then I'll notice that like I'll notice little things and I'm like, oh, that's coming back in. Like still to this day, like how many years later, like 8 years later, I still cannot stand on a scale because I'm like terrified that I will see a number and just not be happy what's come up, and then I'm just starting it all over again.
I just wondered if you could tell me what your personal experience is with an eating disorder.
Yeah, of course. My eating disorder started when I was 12 years old, when I transitioned into secondary school. And since then, it's been very up and down with things, but the sort of constant throughout it all has been restriction of eating and over-exercising. I used to play semi-professional sport as well, which didn't help with the exercise side of things. But throughout the time, because I was very rarely an unhealthy weight, as it's called in terms of BMI scale, I was never given any help or support.
Right.
And even when I was told because I'm a man that they don't know what to do with me, they can't help me, or etc. etc.
Yeah.
You know, I'm at the stage now where I'm physically quite stable, but mentally still definitely recovering. And trying to raise awareness really that eating disorders aren't about weight. You know, I had anorexia, atypical anorexia, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But it's by far not the most common eating disorder, and we need to be cognizant of people in all body sizes as well.
And you say about, you know, the gender thing that comes into it. So why do you think it is that people just assume that men don't get eating disorders?
I think it's an underlying stigma around eating disorders that it's a diet gone wrong, or it's a thin white woman's illness. And I say that with no sort of malice, but it's a definite stigma underlying. It's an unconscious bias as well, I believe. And also a lot of men feel like it's a weakness maybe to actually be honest about it and be honest about how they're feeling. I think only recently that stigma starting to be pulled apart a little bit. But
could you be honest? Could you be honest with your friends at the time? I know you say, and I totally understand, it does not just go away. Even if you're doing better, it doesn't go away. It's always just on the back burner, and you learn to live with it. But could you, when you're at your worst, shall we say, could you reach out to people?
My family, yes. My friends, because at the time when I was at my worst, I was quite young. Don't think they got it.
Yeah.
They didn't understand. There was no awareness in schools of eating disorders, let's put it that way. So I was sort of an outcast, if you like. I was a bit strange, and it didn't really. Don't think it clicked with them, but with my family it did. I spent a lot of years in denial as well, and that's quite common with people with eating disorders. So they're in denial. So other people picking up those signs potentially could have helped a little bit, but it was definitely, when you're a young teenager, especially when 10 years ago, there was very, very little awareness.
And how do you get on with your life now? Because you say, physically you're stable in, but mentally it's not necessarily all fixed, because you do a lot to raise awareness as well. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so I sort of do a lot on social media to raise awareness. I do a lot of interviews and articles and that sort of thing. I also support Hope Virgo's Dump the Scales campaign, which is getting parliamentary support now as well, which is really good.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing!
Yeah, I know,
well,
it's amazing. No, it's starting to get some real traction, and hopefully it's going to help change policy. But with recent announcements, I don't hold that much hope with sort of recent better health announcements and all that. But I still struggle with my eating. I still struggle with the mental side of things. Yeah. I have permanent damage because of my eating disorder as well, which I have to live with for the rest of my life. But that's something that is relatively unknown. And I see my recovery as being able to manage how I am and have a healthy and happy life. I don't see it as being completely free of any thoughts ever again, because I don't want to aim for that and not hit it, if that makes sense. It's about managing expectations.
And can you tell me about your experience with an eating disorder?
So it was 2018 in November. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. And that wasn't like the first time that I had really like had an issue with like food. Like, it's been a consistent battle throughout my life for as long as I can remember, really. But there came a point back in March 2018. I found myself in prison. So a lot of girls around me kind of like pointed it out, but again, with eating disorders, you can become quickly attached to the denial kind of side of things. So I was blatantly in denial, like I didn't want to acknowledge it. I was already like not in the best place as it was. Like I found myself in prison. Like that wasn't the best circumstance I could have ever been in my life. And throughout my sentence, it was a consistent conversation that kept being had with like the other inmates. And I was just like, no, it's fine. Like I'm always like this. And I mean, the only thing I could do in my cell was exercise. So again, like exercise was another form of, I guess, control for me. And that's what my eating disorder indicated for me, was control over my whole entire life. Because my whole life, it has been dictated by other people.
Right.
I've been in foster care, so again, where I was meant to live, like who I was meant to see, who I was meant to have contact with, like that was all dictated to me throughout my life. So I had pretty much no control over my life until I reached 18. And then got diagnosed with anorexia. And I don't know, I felt a bit numb, if I'm completely honest. Like I didn't want to believe it, but at the same time I knew there was an issue. I just thought it'd go away.
And I think it's an interesting point you make as well about, having a life that you felt you had no control over, because a lot of the time people say, well, it's one thing in my life that I can control. You can control, initially you can control, and then it becomes a mental illness where you can't control what you do because it's just your routine and it's, what you've learned. And well, I don't want to say what you've learned is okay, because you kind of know it's not okay, but it's kind of that initial, I have this control over my life. This is what I'm going to control. I can control what I put in my mouth. I can control how much exercise I do. But was it ever for you something to do with body image or not liking the way that you looked?
Oh yeah, I always thought that I was fat. Like I would scroll through, even now I would scroll through my camera roll and time hops on Facebook, and like things would pop up and it would be about my body image and how I looked in photos, and I would write stuff that kind of an 11-12-year-old shouldn't even have a thought about. And even now, like a comparison is so like great in terms of I'll walk down the road and I'll see like a 12-year-old kid and like compare myself to them, like and it is one of those things that once it's so disordered, you don't actually know what you really look like, and that really upsets me, because I can look in a mirror and be like, oh, like I'm the fattest person ever, but I won't actually realise like what I'm looking at. Like every day is completely different.
And if you don't mind me asking, where are you with it now? How do you feel today, for example?
I have my ups and I have my downs. Like there's days where I can cope really well, and there's days where I can't cope at all. But in the last 2.5 years, I've learnt coping strategies, and I have an amazing support network, which I'm really, really grateful for. I think because without them, I probably wouldn't be here today, if I'm completely honest.
Oh wow.
Okay. I mean, I'm a twin as well, so she's supported me like massively throughout this whole journey. Like she was in a similar situation that I was a few years ago, but due to domestic violence, and she became unwell. So she kind of knows what it's like, but in a sense, it's heartbreaking for me, because I know that as much as I am breaking the hearts of my loved ones, there's an element of I can't stop what I'm doing, no matter how much I know I'm hurting other people. And I think that's the sad reality of eating disorders. It's a selfish illness to a certain degree, but it's one that, you can't help.
And do you see there being a day in the future where you can go about your life without thinking about body image, food, exercise?
I hope so.